Welcome back, everyone, to the Transcending Neurodiversity podcast. It's been a little while, but I'm so excited to get going again. And this guest, I'm very excited to have. His name is Eli. He was actually my first or second, doesn't really matter, my first or second fan on social media of Transcending Autism, Transcending Neurodiversity. At the time, it was called Outgrowing Autism. I've kind of changed my name a bit, but he reached out to me. It's got to be 2 years ago now, and we've been good friends ever since. I really appreciate him. I think we learn a lot from each other, and I'm always super impressed with Eli's knowledge on all things mental health, psychology, psychiatry, the whole thing. So I'm just super excited to talk to you, Eli. And he also just wrote a senior thesis because he's finishing his bachelor's soon, which is called Treated as Children, Successful as Adults, Assessing the Lifelong Impacts of Childhood Therapies and Medications, which is an amazing read, and it'll be linked down below. So, Eli, thank you so much for being here. And yeah, I want to give you a chance to kind of talk about yourself a little bit.
I just whenever people ask me how hard was your life, I say I went to five high schools in 4 years in three different states, or I go five high schools, three different states in only 4 years. And so and then I was also sent to the troubled teen industry, placed on medications, which I'm not going to go into the details about this effect, but I'm just saying many medications, many kinds of medications, some that and most of them all of them, most of them, I believe, did more harm than good, especially with the way that they were handled, the way they were prescribed, and the way that they were not even de-prescribed. I didn't even know to get off of them. That's another thing. But why am I sharing all this? Why not just talk about autism? Because my whole theory, my whole belief is that even if we have an ASD diagnosis, and I prefer saying ASD than autism because autism spectrum disorder is much more accurate for us. It's less because like saying autism could be is like often associated with like the more moderate and severe kinds. And it's most closely with people who like want to make like their identity. But for me, it's not my identity. I don't like being defined by my condition. I hate it when when my mom would like tell people he has autism. I hated that so much. And I also hate when like schools would like place me in the worst section because he has autism, or when friends talk to me like a child because he has autism. And so the reason I bring that up is because I don't want to have that define us. And with my challenges growing up, I found that like those challenges of medication, family, troubled teen industry, the fact that I was sent to a wilderness program, which I was interviewed for. Unfortunately, the interviews are off YouTube now. But they're on their own bowl. But like those stuff, the fact that I was sent to a troubled teen industry wilderness therapy camp that's no longer active, it was shut down. Well, it actually was inspected by the government. It approved the inspection, but they shut down because it was no longer profitable. Because that program was shut down, and because I was sent to a shutdown program, because I was placed on so many medications, because I had a really hard family life, because I went to so many high schools in 4 or 3 years, and because of so much stuff, I can list like a whole like the whole traumas and backstory, everything. That was much more impactful than just autism, and some of it might have been connected to autism diagnosis. You could make that point, but I don't like it when like someone's like, Eli said hard autism, or you say this person said this autism, just making it the whole excuse is annoying, and it's also kind of degrading. Like here's another what like if someone is gay or trans and they had a hard life, would you say it's just because they were gay or trans, or would you say it's because of other stuff? And maybe the gayness and the transness could contribute, just like the autism can contribute, but more as if how people perceive it, and how people misperceive it rather
Yeah.
than the disorder itself.
Yeah, yeah. No, I often think, think of like a child, who, they're a young child and growing up, their parents and these big institutions and these experts pretty much all come together and put this label on you that you're a disordered person. There's something wrong with this kid. They're broken. Something's up. I mean, that's a really damaging label. And I think, I think we both agree on when you look at sort of the autistic community, I think there's just a lot of trauma there where people sort of start identifying with sort of being broken or like, this idea that they're inherently broken. And yeah, so I think that's where we really agree on a lot of things and where
Strongly
we've
agree.
shared a
You
lot of
nailed it.
yeah, where we've shared just a lot of our past. Yeah, and if you have anything in that you want to respond to, let me know. But I want to kind of also talk about your senior projects and just like, what came up? What did you learn? So kind of take it wherever you want to go.
Sure. So I directly agree that when like kids are told by experts, by parents, by teachers that like they're disordered, they feel like it becomes it internalizes for them. It internalizes for them. So that and then it just feels and it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like there's this famous message called "You can't be what you don't see." I think it's like in Misrepresentation that feminist documentary. Obviously not true because there are a lot of people who become trailblazers, who are leaders in what they don't know and don't see. There are autistic people who can become very famous actors, but like one thing I talked about is that like but some of them are usually old, so old like Anthony Hopkins, for example. He's Hannibal Lecter and he's Odin in the Thor MCU movies. I grew up with Marvel movies as a child since I was 10. So like I'm kind of a nerd in that regard. But I love like how Anthony Hopkins says that he believes labels are basically bunk and he doesn't agree with them, and he did not grow up with them. And look what that led to him. People might call him ableist or internalized ableist for that, which is absurd. But I think that's like shows like people who like that don't believe in labels. Look how successful they are versus people who believe labels define them. Like they are seen maybe seen as like autistic actors. Like Anthony Hopkins, when you ask most people, they'll think he's an actor. They don't even know he's autistic. And or Wentworth Miller, he came out late. But so my point is like we should not like let these labels define us. I would love if in the future someone who is diagnosed young as a child would become very successful and then they wouldn't be known for their disability. That would be amazing. I would love that. But we do not cannot predict the future. And yeah, back to my senior project. So I went to Bard College, upstate New York. I went there after I went to USF, and I like Bard. I feel that the college was, I mean, I'm not a big fan of like liberal arts colleges, so I said no at first, but then it's really unique. It's very skeptical. There's a lot of smart people there, and it's also, it's not just about like, it's also pretty critical. Like, a lot of the professors are not as, I don't want to get into politics and get your account in trouble. I'll just say this, they're not as woke. There are some who have a lot of strong opinions about so many different issues around race, around Israel. I'm not going to go into the specifics of that because that's not what we're talking about. But one thing I'm grateful for is their psychology programs, especially that they talk about that psychology is often a cultural construct, that Western concepts of mental illness are not mental illness in other cultures. Like in schizophrenia, for example, the voices, they're seen as like a natural occurrence. In some cultures, like in African tribes, hearing voices is seen as a gift. And people with schizophrenia, like in India and Nigeria, they'd have so much better outcomes than the US. Like the WHO has found that multiple times. I know there might have been some flaws in the studies, but they found, and so with the shows, what I love learning about in this college is like, is how much, and then in depression, for example, before not, is like, is so much more common in the US than it is in China because they diagnose it very differently. Now, this is not to say that China doesn't have any problems with mental health treatment. They definitely do. They have authoritarian coercive systems as well, but they don't have the mass diagnosis that the US does.
Hmm.
And I wonder like how many and like I think autism is like a global phenomenon, but I think it's less diagnosed in some countries, not because it's less common, but because I think people like that are just more accepted.
Yeah,
I think
one.
some like I'm sure like in these like tribal communities and if they live in huts, for example, they will not have the same standardized tests and schooling and everything. That is like why we diagnose it so often here. And so back my senior, so that's why I love going to Bard. So that's why I'm grateful. So where does this where am I getting at? I am getting at by the fact that Bard will let me have the senior project that's more critical. That's a more it's critical, but it's very nuanced. Like people on all sides really liked my project because it was not like against psychiatry. I'm definitely not against all of psychiatry, but I'm also not gonna be like those uncritical pro-psychiatry ideologue journalists who like say stuff like who treat like every time someone like the rates of mental health treatment as if like every increase in diagnosis and increase in treatment is an unambiguous good, as if
Hmm.
it's definitely a benefit, as if the
Yeah.
meds have benefits or side effects. The side
Hmm.
effects is in the side. It's like they're not the biggest deal. They might be like insomnia, might be slightly irritable, but they'll never leave out the major effects, which is that often the negative effects of the meds can be worse than the positives, and this is true for so many people.
Mm-hmm.
And we should stop and this is not like anti-psychiatry propaganda. This is where people live. And so why I wrote this project? And I mentioned I mentioned ASD, autism spectrum disorder, but it's not about autistic people. It's about the treatments in general. And autistic people are very welcome in this project, of course.
Mm-hmm.
It's about asking people who went through long-term childhood treatment, both therapy and medication, did it help them or hurt them more in the long run? And there's often, and I expect that if I were to run this one, it would not be a yes or no answer. It would not be positive or negative. It would be mixed because life is full of nuance. And the same is especially true for treatments. And the reason I'm getting at this is because autistic people are disproportionately medicated, disproportionately placed in psychiatry. Like people think like, oh, someone's has autism spectrum disorder, they should be on antidepressants, antipsychotics, ADHD meds, mood stabilizers, benzodiazepines, every kind of medication on like that's legal.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some medication that are actually prescribed that are FDA approved for autism spectrum disorder. Like that's just the most stigmatizing thing ever, just to be told that your disorder, which is not inherently violent, which is not inherently like a deficiency, has meds approved for. Like imagine if there are medications specifically approved for being trans or for being gay.
Mm-hmm.
And there are and that and
Oh,
so
sorry. No, keep going.
yeah, so well my point is that like it's the problem is like or is like and I feel like, I just feel like we can we don't need to be on psychiatry just unless we want unless it directly helps us unless we feel it helps us unless it's like objectively seen and I don't want to say like oh what if the teachers notice you doing better on these ADHD meds for example or your parents think oh you're happier on the antidepressants because it shouldn't be other people determining us for our lives and that was based on like my life story growing up is I was
Yeah.
told when I was trying to go off meds, they're like, oh, Eli, ask your teachers. They think you did better on these ADHD meds than off. And it's like, and it basically shows us no good deed goes unpunished. If you take the meds and you do well, then it's the meds. If you take the meds and you suffer on them, even if it's like has there's a black box warning that shows that these meds cause agitation, irritability, aggression, suicidality, and that like they are known to cause that. And if someone takes them and has those experiences, they're still blamed. And that's another thing. It's like when autistic people are on these meds and then they react worse, often because of the effects of the meds, which has happened to me, which has happened to a lot of people, which happens to a lot of people on bipolar, for example, with SSRIs. They are often it causes more issues. And then they get misdiagnosed as like psychotic and they're placed on even more stronger antipsychotic medications. And this has happened. I'm not going to dispute, but I remember explicit traumatic memories of when I was placed on certain SSRIs, certain ADHD meds, how I over negative reaction in ways that I would not react before I took the meds. That did not happen then. Or it was withdrawal and acted worse because of withdrawal. And then
Mm-hmm.
people immediately assume, oh, that's just me. That's just autism. Like, it's just autism when they assume that. And I find that like it's really big and really hurtful and how and so there was a book that came out recently. Have you heard of
Yeah.
Unshrunk by Laura
Well,
Delano?
could I, sorry, could I come in? I just,
Yes,
I had like
absolutely.
so many different thoughts come through as you were speaking, and I want to let you get to your point, but yeah, one thing that I've noticed I think is causing a lot of this is that I think in the West, we often think that, or people often forget that science is a model for reality.
Hmm.
Science is not actual reality, Like all these different terms and variables that we create for natural phenomena are just models, right? Um, and so I think a lot of times in the West, we sort of take these scientific labels as like actual reality, like it's the truth now. Even
Scientism.
yeah, yeah, pretty much. And even though autism is just a label for a super broad category, and then when it comes to psychiatry, another thing that happens in the world of science is that they take a mechanistic presumption of how the body works. So pretty much they study the body and view the body akin to a machine, akin to this phone right here. Like we're all just these machines. And if you're not operating in the normal way, then there must be something broken about the machine and we need to intervene. But this is not, this again is detached from reality because you and I are not inherently broken. We just have different cognitive and social processing, which has its own features, you know? And so, yeah, this is where I sort of think the world of psychiatry and psychology is really disconnected from truth and has just, yeah, gone pretty delusional. Um,
I
yeah.
strongly agree with that. No, it's like because science is a model for gaining knowledge as a process. It's not like an idea. There's no one science. like they're like and science is supposed to have and like one thing we learn in psychology at Bard at least, I don't know if they teach it in other places, but science and research, it does not prove anything but supports a theory because there's no one scientific model. And we had to sort of like science can support a theory, but it can't prove theory. It cannot disprove theory. It can have evidence that does not support a theory. Like, for example, they don't accept the null hypothesis, but they don't accept the alternative hypothesis, sorry, but they can reject the null hypothesis. Or they can fail to reject the null. They don't say accept the null. And they don't
Mhm.
say accept the alternative hypothesis, for example. That's how ideal science is supposed to go. But now we have people say the science says this, therefore this. And there's so much corrupt science. There's like and I've seen these articles, and not just on psychiatry, for example. It's not just psychiatry. There's so many other forms of science where people think like, well, the science says this, therefore this. But then if you look in the study, the actual science you're reading, like this is actually not good science. Like for like Ethiopian, like there's science that found that the Ethiopians have low IQs, for example. And then that study found like these like children who are like refugees who went through a lot of trauma, who did not even know what the IQ test was supposed to asking them to do, and said they have low IQs. Like did you know Ethiopia is home to has been home to Christianity for before since before Europe has? Christianity was brought to Ethiopia. But they built their churches in Ethiopia. They're older than the oldest church in Europe. I don't know if they're still standing now, but the first churches
Mm.
in Africa and like outside the Middle East were constructed in Ethiopia.
Mm.
Like so, I don't believe. So I brought this out because like science can be flawed, and since with psychiatry, I've seen these articles that say I'm getting. Again, I need to catch myself because like this is going so off topic, and I can but and so that's the point then, because when I did the study, when I actually did the deep dives, I can find that like there's actually a lot of science that can prove that there are harmful effects of medications, there are harmful effects of this stuff. And so when institutions like the American Psychiatric Association say stuff like these meds are help people and you must preserve our access to them, and it's like, no, you're proving the exact side. There's this really awesome writer who I love, who I really like. He should not be controversial, but he is, unfortunately. His name is Aves off top, and I would love to link some of his articles, which is part
Mhm.
of what inspired my
We'll put
senior
it below.
project. Yeah, and he writes for the New York Times. He writes for Psychiatry on the Margins. He's actually a family friend. He actually wrote with my aunt before she unfortunately died by suicide.
Mm.
My aunt Lisa Wallace, unfortunately, and that was for Trump. I told him and he wrote her obituary and it was very heartfelt. But and so what he writes is basically that he is a psychiatrist. He prescribes medications, but he also believes they are overprescribed, that there are significant harms that people do not talk about, and that we should not treat it as simple as like on the pro psychiatry side, safe and effective, or on the anti psychiatry side, worse than heroin, like RFK Jr. says. And that's another point. And so we were also going to talk about someone else. You
Yeah,
want
before we talk about RFK Jr., I also want to mention another thing, which is just on the topic of science, and then we'll pull it to RFK Jr. So, on the topic of science, one thing that I am critical of science of is that a lot of these scientists will kind of pose that like they don't believe anything and that they have no assumptions and they're just curiously exploring the world with pure
to?
unbiasedness. But here's the thing. In order to do science, you have to have a presumption about nature in order to know how to approach the data, and what valid data is. And again, it seems like science has this presumption about human beings that they need to be a certain way and that they operate like machines. And if they don't operate like this idealized machine, then they must be broken. And this is what psychiatry has been operating from since its beginning, and it's not working. It's not
Ah.
working. So that's kind of what came up in my mind as you said that. Yeah, and if you have anything to respond to that, of course, go ahead. If not, I know you want to say something about RFK.
I strongly agree with that. No, it's like science, like it cannot be unbiased. We're all humans. Like scientists, they have to take they have to take like they have to have conflicts of interest. And I mean that's why every good study has to have conflict of interest board. And honestly, I tr only trust the ones where the I know it sounds hypocritical, where they admit the scientists have conflict of interest, but they say none of any stated conflict of interest. I trust them less because come on, you're human. You do this for money. you must have at least one conflict of interest. And so if you admit that, good for you. Thank you for doing that. We are human, that everything is flawed, but they say we have to have none. That's horrible because then some of the worst, some of the most some like because a lot of investigation have found that, for example, the DSM, the scientists who are at the DSM, they have like conflicts of interest with like pharmaceutical companies that are not even listed that investigators have found out. Like
Wow.
that should be a scandal. And there's so many scandals. And don't even get started on study. I think it was 329, which
Go for it.
study 329, which basically was ghost written by like a pharmaceutical company, not even by a scientist, where they tested kids on Paxil. They said that they overwhelmingly had no that they thrived on Paxil, they succeeded well, but they leave out that study, a lot of the kids had suicidality, serious negative effects, that this they actually left out of the study. They hid from the results, and investigators had to find. And that study has been discredited. One of the authors of the study is a senator named Stan Kutcher in Canada. Um, when that study went viral again, he actually deleted his X account because he's pro science. But he was part of the study, so that's a forever taint on his career. And he could have just like admitted, and I think he did admit that it was fraudulent and that he wasn't like one of the lead writers of the study. But they just don't even take like a lot of scientists who like make these fraud corporate corrupt sites. They don't even acknowledge their mistakes. They don't even
Hmm.
acknowledge when they do wrong, and so that's important just to think about. And this is important because like on Wikipedia, for example, they have like this extreme scientism bias. Like every alternative medicine, if you visit, it will say this is pseudoscience, this is objectively quackery. Even functional medicine by Dr. Mark Hyman, which works. Functional
Hmm.
medicine works really well, and then also it's also very Western, kind of like supremacist, and they insult Ayurveda or homeopathy is German and it's universal and it's mostly European, but it's also very common cultural in like India. And like and then so it's and there might be some truth. We can debate that. Like it's good. Like you should always debate all forms of medicine, alternative and mainstream. But the issue is like if you debate mainstream medicine, it's seen as like you're a conspiracy theorist. If you debate alternative
Yeah.
medicine, it's like the righteous crusade. And
Yeah.
so we're talking about RFK Jr. now, right?
Yeah, I also want to say on the topic of science, yeah, I mean, now a lot of these prominent scientists turned out they had dealings with Epstein, you know? So these, these saintly experts who were just doing this noble work, turns out there was a dark underbelly there this whole
Even
time.
Richard Feynman, who was my grandfather's professor, one of the most brilliant minds, he's not a fraud, and as long as I don't know he is. He drew naked pictures of his female classmates, and he would sorry, students, which is extremely creepy, but like, and you would not expect that, but no, that's our most successful professor. And then some of the scientists, like James Watson, they stole like the DNA from Rosalind Franklin, and there's so much fraud and corruption in science. The father of gynecology, like tortured black women, and he didn't even use any anesthetics, even though they had some anesthetics. That didn't even use the minimum they had back then. And psychiatry. They had the lobotomy back then. JFK's sister was brutally lobotomized. Oh my gosh, they gave her a fate worse than death for 60 years. It was horrific to even think about. And then in psychiatry, that conversion therapy, which I read about in my senior project, that was mainstream science. And homosexuality was a disorder until it was removed from the 1970s. And as people talk about, if homosexuality could be removed from the disorder list because people protested, that means it's not a scientific list because science should not be changed by protests.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. So I want to kind of switch, like, over to, yeah, RFK or psychiatry. We're gonna, both
there.
topics that we're
Well,
kind of floating around right
that's
now.
right. No, but I mean, the reason I'm pointing out the DSM stuff is because like DS homosexuality was in the DSM was a psychiatric condition, and
Oh.
so are so many of these other conditions are also like psychiatric. So we don't know what's going to be changed. Like the DSM-6 is going to come out soon. We don't know if autism spectrum disorder. It used to be Asperger's, now it's autism spectrum disorder. We don't know if they're going to make any changes to that because we are on the same spectrum as people who like cannot function without. And so that's the biggest hypocrisy. That's why I hated when, like, going back to he has autism. When my parents said that, it's like people thought, like, I would be crazy. Like when the police called me once, they thought I was there and deal with like a wild animal kid. But then they're like, "Wow, you are really smart. You're like one of the smartest, most calm people I know. Why were we even here?" And I even like, so that's actually what happened. The police were calling me once. That I'm just turning my trauma into laugh that this really happened. And then this is important because if we just got to think of everything more critically. And so my theory is connecting that to autism spectrum disorder is like connecting, like, is that like a lot of people are critical of diagnoses like bipolar disorder and borderline and depression and anxiety, but we're not critical of like autism spectrum disorder enough.
Hmm.
And like a lot of people think, well, like some people, not everyone deserves to have to be on pine meds for feeling sad, but they don't have the same views like autistic people. Not all autistic people should be on medication, and that's my whole theory. It's like unless they want it, unless they really need it, and also, so that's important. So we're gonna talk RFK Jr., right? Sure. So one thing, so we and I have talked about him for a while. Like we had many multiple phone calls, and my theory, and this is based on my own experience growing up, because I grew up in a more liberal family, mostly liberal community. Obviously not 100% because I had access to the internet, but most of the stuff. And so growing up with the medical model, which I know, which I've heard from other disability speakers, not just around autism, but is very stigmatizing model. And the medical world, the mainstream one, had a lot of stigmatized stuff about autism spectrum disorder. They treat us like kids, and like they're not like obviously they're not genocidal, but like that's the lowest bar. They would say stuff like, "Oh well, you don't need to be in the same schools. You can be put in a school that teaches you much less and teaches you like a children," which ironically made my grades worse. And then they said you need to be in this school longer. Thank God I broke out, and then I did so much better in like schools that are not for autistic people. Like they accept people like us. They have to be accepting of us. They have to be treating us like just like we'll treat everyone else. But they don't have to cater to us. They don't have to like I don't mean cater to us, cater to their own perceptions of us, is what I should say.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because
So how does RFK come into this?
exactly. He comes into this because so RK Jr. Became secretary in 2025 last year. He was not secretary for most of our lives. So most of our lives it was very different ideology to him. And so a lot of people nowadays who were completely silent on the discrimination of autistic people for decades, for years, are now like, oh my God, autistic people, you are loved, you are welcome. Look what RK Jr. is doing to you and all this stuff. And yes, he has done some stuff. He has said some stuff I really detest. He has said stuff. He has appointed people like David Geyer, who I cannot say what I want to happen to him. This video will be taken down if I say what I think should happen to David Geyer. But my point is that like the point is that like this stuff has always been happening. It's just under a different label now, and now people are freaking out. But if anything, the anti-autistic ableism from before RFK Jr. was worse from the mainstream medical system, from the medical establishment, treating it like it's a pathology for everyone, treating it like we all need to be put in worse schools, send the troubled teens to be medicated. Then RFK Jr. comes along, and then they took a lot of his quotes out of context. And I'm not here to defend him. And like a lot of people are like this, and same with Trump. Like Trump is not the problem, he is a symptom of the problem. RFK Jr. is not the problem, he is a symptom of the problem.
And what's the problem?
That is a good question. Psychiatric misunderstandings of autistic people, of disabilities in general, and of disorders. And he says like, and then like, and when I say out of context, I mean that famous quote where he said like autistic people never be able to pay taxes, play baseball game, go to have a go on write a poem or stuff. I think he was talking about the more moderate to severe kinds. He wasn't
Hmm.
talking about the more mild kinds. And the things like sometimes Trump said like MS-13 members are animals. And people thought I said, oh, all immigrants, but I was saying MS-13 members. And they're like journalists in New York Times who hate Trump, but they all say, we're not take his words off credits. We believe in what's truth because truth matters. And same with
Hmm.
RFK Jr., truth matters. So we got to criticize what he said that is true. And so I don't know about the Tylenol image. I don't know if that's what made us this way or not. I don't think so. I don't think it was, I don't know if it was vaccines either. I went through my vaccine record and then I got the MMR actually well before I got my onset. So I don't think it was that either, but who knows? I mean, it's like one of the, like, if there are like 10 questions I could ask God, one of them would be, why am I autistic? Why am I this way? That would
Hmm.
have to be one of the
Yeah.
unanswered questions I would ask is like, and it's among why are we here? Why did we have to live this life? And
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Sorry, I want to. I have an interesting point, which is it
Mhm.
seems like the old. establishment before RFK pretty much saw autism as purely genetic and this purely like genetic malfunctioning almost.
Hmm.
Now RFK is almost seeing this as like purely environmental. And like
Hmm.
he's also still generalizing autism as just this bad thing that just needs to be treated. So that's kind of what the two kind of have that in common where they both generalize, but they have two different approaches. The old model talks all about nature, just genetics. RFK talks all about these environmental factors and stuff. And yeah, I think from my perspective, I disagree with both sides because it's got to be a mix of both. There's got to be a genetic aspect, and
Absolutely.
there's got to be something to do with neuroinflammation, which might make it worse for other people. And yeah. So to me, it's like the scale, like the pendulum swung the other way, and there's like maybe slight progress as a whole when I look out at the world, but yeah, we're still dealing with some BS.
Yeah. I think there is progress. I think there's all been a lot of progress since 2020. Some of it's gone too far in the wrong way. Like you have these awesome advocate accounts. I feel like are kind of too prominent in some ways because like I said, they basically tell us without calling us the word that we are retards. And I mean is like when they have these accounts like neurodivergent Lou, for example, she's smart, she's a really good graphic designer, and she's really articulate speaker. And I think and I'm not against her and but I don't agree with a lot of her points. I don't agree that like we have meltdowns because the world's not set to our centers, because meltdowns have to be triggered by like a lot of really hard, really stressful life that honestly would also trigger a neurotypical person as well. But that depends. And like that's one of the issues. I also dislike how a lot of these autism counts like they treat like they say what's not traumatic to a neurotypical person is traumatic to an autistic person, and then that basically gives neurotypical people to tell them that they should just treat us like babies. They don't upset us. At like my last job, for example, that I had the coworkers that were talking to me like kids, and then my roommate who was neurotypical, but he was really smart. I really like this guy. He was actually not afraid. He was not walking out eggshells around me. He was saying like some honest views about his perception around autism spectrum disorder, and like how he was initially ignorant. How he even told me some stuff like a lot of people would be very scared to say out of fear of being canceled. But I was like, thank you for being honest with me. And he's still my friend today, and he told me, Eli, you should tell them to stop treating me like a child. But I said, if I try to police their tone more, then they're gonna get even more cautious around how to talk to me by telling them you must talk to me this way. And I thought, are they going to talk to me too aggressively? That could even backfire even worse. So at least they're talking like a kid. It's causes less stress because this is a job environment, and we don't need a job to be any more stressful. And so that is so the pendulum has kind of swung back since 2020, as we were talking about the other day, and I think it is more. I think there is. I think. I think some of it is looking up when more autistic people are able to speak up and have more and have more of like a mainstreamness in society. And that is one of the positives I have
Yeah.
noticed.
Yeah. I've noticed that when people are kind of exploring their autism, like when I have conversations with people about this, there's like no fear around it anymore. There's very little fear. I think before, like 10 years ago, if someone was exploring the fact they're autistic, they'd have to be cautious on like kind of who to tell and it'd be kind of this more controversial thing. But now it's just like, I'll talk to someone and they're like, "Oh yeah, I think I'm autistic." And like there's no sort of like cautiousness anymore. So yeah, it is. I just feel like acceptance has gotten much better. And one kind of underrated factor that I think has caused this is actually like big names like Elon and Bill Gates coming out as autistic. Even though, people obviously can be very critical of those two figures, but I actually think like like subtly, it's like a blessing in disguise
I
because these
agree.
were people that the world looked up to for years. And now it's like, yeah, we're autistic. And I think this actually gives a lot of people permission to be like, okay, I'm not like them, but I can still be very successful and autistic.
I definitely love that. 'Cause, like, I know a lot of people who are autistic. They really hate having Elon come out that way. But like for like Elon's like the most hated people. But I mean, and as some of the stuff he does that I definitely am not gonna get into, but I definitely don't agree with. I'm really happy he's autistic. That the richest man in the world. That gives us so much hope. I love that Wentworth Miller when I was a kid. When I was like when I was 14 and 15, in my first year of high school and last year of middle school, I used to watch the show called Arrow and The Flash. There's this actor who acts Captain Cold named Wentworth Miller. He acts in Prison Break as well. And he came out as autistic. He's one of the most nicest, most compassionate people, but he's also such a badass actor. I would not have expected that he was on the spectrum. I love this guy. I was really happy for this as well. He's like a totally positive influence. And I think Kanye said he might be autistic a few years ago. That would have also been awesome. Now, I know he's definitely not the best influence either, like Elon, but he also is, you cannot say he's not successful. You cannot say he isn't a musical genius. You cannot say he isn't successful with, well, maybe you can't say he's not successful in his romantic life. Maybe you could make that argument, but not the other stuff. Um, and so like that's that. So that is great. The issue is sometimes I feel like people are too open about it. People are like way too open about. Some people are just too open about being autistic. Like they make that like their identity, and that gets annoying. That's almost make it their own personal identity. That's fine. But like when they like say like, oh, they try to make stereotypes about all of us. That feels annoying. When they say,
Hmm.
listen, I'm autistic, we must feel this way, or don't do this for sincerely the autistic community. They don't speak for all of us.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to say, like, look, the world is a difficult place for everyone. Like, this is not an easy time to be alive. We're all, dealing with our own suffering. And I think what happens with, I think, a lot of autistic people is they want sort of like, they want to blame it on something or they want to kind of like play victim. I mean, you see this with like a lot of other things, where it's like, oh, I'm autistic, therefore therefore my behavior is all over the place and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And it's a bit limiting. Go for it.
and yeah, I have noticed that as well. I also, on the other hand, I also notice this is often a neurotypical thing. Is neurotypical people, they say, "Oh, autistic people blame their autism for their bad behavior." That's also a huge, really vile ableist generalization. I have gotten in so much trouble, even for like minor misunderstandings, and I have never said, "Well, I'm autistic, don't get me in trouble," or I've even tried to use it as a way to get out of trouble. I have never done that ever in my life, even I could have. And some people have actually, I didn't even tell them, some people actually like were even more compassionate because they noticed I was not neurotypical. I think this was like in middle school when I was saying offensive stuff because we're middle schoolers. That's what we do. I, I would definitely not do that again. And, but I mean, I think the only time like that really gets like public news, like someone says, "Oh, don't do this to me. I'm autistic." It's like in news, like is in like legal cases. Like someone's like, I know Brian Koberger claimed that he's autistic, therefore he should avoid consequences. And I hope that, and I'm glad that was thrown out and he was sentenced to life without parole because
Mhm.
autism does not make us murder people, especially not innocent people. Maybe like if someone's like bullying us severely and making life living hell, but then so would like neurotypical people would also do something.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this also gets into the point of like, how autism is just like this really young label that's just like it's very underdeveloped. Like the label is just
Hmm.
very broad. And so it's like and the fact that like that this like flawed label is just being used in court cases, to be like, "Oh, I'm autistic." Therefore, it's like again, it shows you that like in the West, we don't treat autism as this nuanced thing.
But
Um,
like there's also, have you heard of the case of Brendan Deppa in Florida?
no.
So he was a kid. He was 18. Or no, he was actually 17 at the time. He's a black kid. He went through a really traumatic life. Oh my gosh. I read his mom's story. It's on the website Flagler Live. I can send it to you afterwards or maybe in the description of what I'm mentioning. It was heartbreaking. He like went through so much trauma. He's adopted. He was went away. He was placed in like so many medications that made him grow away, but also made him like lose his mind. And then he had a disagreement with his teacher about like a device. He beat his teacher up, and because he had two prior convictions, including one where he beat up like racist school bullies, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was there. He was looking at 10 years, 30 years in prison. Actually, there was almost sentenced to 30 years in prison. Thank God it was only five. And then he has like 20 years of probation after the sentence is over. And and then I read like the his like I thought this guy was his attorney or his like educational like advocate or something, but he like wrote that Brendan like had this really thoughtful view. He was a really nuanced person, and and then he even wrote like Pokemon raps or something in prison. Like in prison, he was writing raps about his favorite Pokemons. And like this guy, like and even though, and so it's not just he's autistic, he's even through so much trauma, and he lashed out, and and that he was not supposed to be in the school, and like, and then he was vilified in the media. Oh my gosh, they hate him because the footage of him beating up his teacher is pretty gnarly. I will admit that does not look good, but I think overall he's the greater victim. And I've been ratioed, I've been stigmatized, I've been insulted because I've spoken up for this guy. And so my point is like sometimes autistic people are also victims of society, and it's not just because of autism, but because of treatments that can somewhat relate. And so it's very nuanced.
Hmm. Totally, totally. I know we're reaching sort of the 40-minute mark, or like we've kind of surpassed it. So I'm just, and like, which doesn't mean we have to end it, but I
Hmm.
know we sort of planned on this. But is there anything else that's just feeling alive for you that you want to talk about?
And probably quasi maybe you should go for an hour.
Yeah, go. Let's do it.
And yeah, maybe we should go for an hour. Anyway, so yeah, I feel like there's so much to talk about. And I feel that like the reason that like and so the reason I was bringing up Unshrunk from that book, which I wish I had a copy of right now. I don't, unfortunately. It's back at school. But that book that I took is a book by Laura Delano. She's not autistic, she's borderline bipolar, but she's an amazing woman to talk to me. She doesn't respond to messages online that well. But if you meet her in person, which is a rare opportunity, she's amazing. And I love talking to her. But she like admits, like she said basically when we spoke, she said like her life is like an experience, her experience is like a universal one. That like being diagnosed, having labels placed on you, being sent to institutions, and then having treatment that makes you suffer more than without the treatment. And I thought like, the same could be true for people on the autism spectrum. Like, why are people on the autism spectrum like disproportionately medicated? Why are we sent to the troubled teen industry disproportionately? As I think I should show, is that like my wilderness therapy program, which is Evoke Cascades, Evoke Therapy, when they accept people for every little reason, they accept for autism spectrum disorder, drug addiction, porn use, violence, all of it. They put it all together. So our condition is seen as like as pathological as like drug use.
Yeah, I think a lot of this that we're talking about might come back to like economics and just like financial incentive. I mean, when we talk about these institutions that want to like, enroll a bunch of students, but also just why autism diagnoses even happen in the first place. I think a lot of times kids at school, schools kind of want to create employees. Like that's like a lot of what schools are. And so I think when schools notice that a kid's not learning normally or socializing normally, they kind of flag that as like, oh, he's not going to be a good employee. We need to sort of put him in this different route, you know? And I think that it kind of, again, this kind of stems back to money and economics. And just like the fact that I think autistics aren't you can't really fit autistics into one of those boxes or make them a cog in a machine um, that'll make your company money. Like no, we have our own uniqueness, and our creativity is what is really like is a lot of our strong point is our creativity and what makes us different. So a lot of this comes back down to economics. What do you think?
I strongly agree with that. That's a very smart theory that like I've thought more as an adult because like when I was a kid, I didn't need to work. So it was like I didn't think of economics that much. I didn't need to work. Um, I didn't really know what work really was. But as an adult, I understand that's why schools it works like they want like they're part of all the system, the machine. So autistic people, like I said, we don't fully fit in the machine. It's like that's like why we learn differently. We're more likely to have other disorders like ADHD that like also mean we don't learn exactly the same way. And and that's why like people think autistic people are a burden on society because we don't have the same job like opportunities. But some of us, but as you point out, like Elon Musk, some of us can be and Bill Gates, some of us can be the top. And I think that your theory is absolutely on point. And that's one thing I wrote about my senior project is like we gotta think about like we should measure like love and work like as Freud pointed out or like the long-term impacts of treatment. There's this really interesting study, I can't remember the name of it, but it's not about autistic people, it's about borderline personality disorder. And they found that people who were in recovery had like better life opportunities, like better jobs and better love romantic lives than those without. And they said that they shouldn't just focus on like reducing symptoms through treatment. They should also focus on like finding like a full outcome in life, a
Hmm.
fuller life satisfaction. And I think we should do the same with autistic people. We can have, some of the same normal human goals like love and work. We should definitely include those and try to find ways. Because I mean, like if like there are some people who are successful jobs and they have probably worse issues than autism. They are probably have like much worse behaviors and like and there are autistic people. So I think it would be what we should do in society to fix get autistic people. We should. So I believe in a mix of both like I don't believe like neurotypical people should have like set everything to change for autistic people, but I also think that like there should be some accommodations so autistic people can have the ability to be accommodated
Hmm.
into fitting into the new society. And so I think if we one of those best outcome be like autistic people be have much easier time being employed would be less likely to be disciplined unless it was like really unsafe, unless it was like extremely unsafe behavior. Like they should not be disciplined the same way at school or at work for like diff social cue differences or that, and then that's because that has happened to me. And I wrote about that in a blog, and one of the reasons I kicked out of my boarding school was I wasn't the same way socially, and I when I was stressed out, I talked to people when I shouldn't have talked. And then and then also, it's like a lot of people are trying to solve like the male loneliness epidemic, for example, which I personally think is a big deal. And one of the reasons I think it's a big problem is that it disproportionately affects people on the autism spectrum, especially young men. And I think
Hmm.
that like I'm not saying I have to walk on eggshells, I have to walk on thin ice here and eggshells here, because I'm not saying like any of those proposed like forced monogamy or anything like that solution, but they should be like match finders, the same way we treat like neurotypical people who are safe to like have help autistic people get into relationships as well if they want one, both
Hmm.
men and female, and of course 100% voluntary, though both parties, both the man and the woman, should be able to say no at any whim.
Hmm.
But like I'm saying, if autistic people are more likely to find relationships, they're more likely to find jobs. I think that autism would not be seen as a problem like it is right now. And yeah, I stand with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and psychiatric medicine, and I think you would agree with this, psychiatric medicine should be an option, like we're not against like Western psychiatric medicine here. Like, and I know like I think we both know people who are autistic and have ADHD or have ADHD who really benefit from things like Ritalin and Adderall, where like it
Mhm.
does just help them become good students and get good jobs. And so if someone wants to go that route, go for it. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think if you do have to, if forcing a kid to take Ritalin or Adderall so that they can get through this program, this institute, yeah, this program, maybe you shouldn't be questioning the kid's ability or the person's ability. We should be questioning if this is the right program for them. Like,
Absolutely. Like there was this classic, I don't know who said this analogy first, but like, if a fish is not doing well in the tank, we clean the tank, we don't put the fish on meds. The same should be true with a person. I think like schools should have like more like recess and not just recess, but they should be able to walk around class. They should be allowed to like sit on bouncy balls and do stuff. Like when I work as a tutor actually, and when I tutor kids, they're allowed to use fidget spinners. They're allowed to take walks around the class. I'm not offended. As long as they're not like intentionally disrespecting me, and as long
mhm,
as they're still overall focusing on the work, they can do that. They don't need to be miserable drones. And
yeah,
so that's our app society. But and same with like love men. Some people really find that it helps them. But I just think like we should think more about doing it with kids. And especially with like SSRIs, for example, we should be much more cautious about SSRIs and like antipsychotics than
mhm,
ADHD and ADHD meds and some ADHD meds. We should let people have the whole list of effects, like all pages, like not just the minor side effects, but like the long-term effects on like hormones and bone growth and sexuality. And then when they're and then we should like, and especially their teens, provide them the whole list. They should have a choice. I think the SSRIs, I think and all meds should be treated differently. Like for antipsychotics, I think those should be like last resort. If someone's like violent towards everyone else and there should be plans on getting off them. ADHD meds, if the person really wants them, and if they find they do better on them, and for antidepressants, if they're like severely depressed, and they have to be like an older age, like I don't like honestly, a lot of people are against prescribing them to young people, like anyone under 25 period. I don't know about that, but I think that like they're way overprescribed for simple sadness. They should exhaust every single option first. But
Hmm.
like the point about like SSRI, for example, is they can also cause like this agitation, suicidality. That's in the black box warning. That's often seen if someone's autistic. That seems like a part of essentially their autism, not a part of the mental problem. And then when they need to withdraw, they should be told how to do it very slowly, like the Maudsley deprescribing guidelines. Because withdrawal, if someone goes off too fast and then they feel worse due to withdrawal effects, it is often seen as a relapse, meaning return of their depression. Then they're placed on for life, and that's a problem. And also, like, I feel like also another problem is like, the sexual stuff, we should not let that down either, because sexuality is a part of our soul. And like post-SSRI sexual dysfunction, PSSD, as they call it, is really a devastating condition that's hurting a lot of people. That's very much underreported. Thank God there's an amazing article reporting on it in the New York Times by Daniel Bergner. Shout out to him.
Hmm. We can put in the link below.
Yeah, put it in the link below. But then the problem is like there's so much stigma, and as I wrote about in my senior project, one thing I conclude is that there's not only is there stigma towards people who take medication, but also there's a bigger stigma, in my opinion, a much bigger stigma towards people who take the meds and have negative effects from them. They speak out about it because A, they're insulted by an internal society for having needed to take the meds in the first place, seen as mentally ill, but also from the pro psychiatry, the pro mental health, the mental health stigma community are basically telling them, hey, you're gonna deter treatment seeking, you're gonna dissuade people from taking the meds,
Hmm.
therefore you should not speak about your experience. And I said that should not happen. We should support people who have experienced adverse effects from the medications, and we should support them just as much as we'd support people who've experienced adverse effects from, I don't know, McDonald's. Remember the woman who like had her leg burned because of a McDonald's coffee?
Yeah.
Like those are severe burns. Severe.
Hmm.
Like that coffee was illegal. So she was had every right to sue, and she only wanted to sue for the medical bills, not not to win like $500,000. And I think she won like maybe $300,000 at most. It should have been, I think she should have won, sued for like 30 million,
Mm.
honestly, in my opinion. But
Mm.
the problem is
Yeah.
we don't respond with her saying, oh, but McDonald's is good for me. Therefore don't stigmatize people who like McDonald's. We said, we're sorry this happened to you. How can we make McDonald's better for everyone else? We should say, how
Hmm.
can we make the psychiatry system better for everyone else? And like for example, I'm very speaking of McDonald's, I'm very cautious about all the food I eat and all the food, and I'm sure you are too. All the food we consume, because it has a major impact on our mood and our mental health and our physical health as well. So you should do the same with our medications. And if they help you, and listen, and also just a disclaimer, if any of you are on medication, I am not telling you to go off. And if you do want to go off, it must be very slow and safe. The standard people say listen to your doctor, but I will say go off even slower than your doctor may recommend actually,
Mm.
because they might tell you go too fast and that may cause withdrawal. But
Yeah.
so I'm not telling anyone to do anything like that. I am saying that like if someone has had negative impacts, if someone has had negative effects, that they should be allowed to speak without stigma. So what I'm saying is like I'm not anti-meds. I am about advocating for people, whether they're survivors
Hmm.
of the troubled teen industry, of psychiatry, or just people who have disorders like autism spectrum disorder who need to be treated better in society, both from the mainstream medical establishment and also from people on the alternative side like RFK Jr.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing that came to mind when you were speaking was with your tutoring job and how, kids like just kind of need to take walks around the room or and use fidget spinners. And I think just like having that at least be an option and not constraining kids would actually improve kids' behavior so much more because kids, one thing is they just don't like to be controlled. They don't like to be told what to do. And I think this is why there should just be more acceptance of neurobiological variation, and allow people to not be squares pretty much. And one thing I was thinking of too, and this came up for me a couple of weeks ago, um, I just had this realization that a lot of the Western schooling system really highly favors um, left-brained individuals. So like the analytical ones, the ones who are very, yeah, analytical, good with science and engineering, math, like the STEM fields. We're kind of pushed into that direction. But then when it comes to those with, a more creative or intuitive inclination, there's no space for that at all, and I talked to like a teacher or I talked to someone who sent their kid to a Waldorf school. I don't know if you know about that.
I
It's
know
pretty
them.
much, yeah, yeah, it's this like pretty progressive like model. modeled school. And yeah, he talked about the curriculum and sort of like the amount of playtime that the kids get and just like all these different things that they're learning. The fact that art is like something that's like hugely part of the curriculum. I mean, it almost gave me like a pang in my stomach where I was like, ouch, like I really needed that. And I was put in this sort of like, you know, really STEM heavy, mechanistic worldview sort of curriculum that, of course, messed me up. Like, of course, it depressed me. Of course, I didn't find my place in it, you know? So again, like, yeah, this whole system just needs like a revamp. And I think
Absolutely.
autistics and just neurodivergence in general are actually what's helping expose that, you know? You were gonna say something?
No, I strongly agree with that. Like their schools are definitely set up one way for like, the jobs that like will benefit their economy for set up one way. And like then there's also art schools. It's hard because I am not like an artsy person. I cannot paint or draw very well. I am better at writing nonfiction than fiction. Like I'm much better at reporting on what happened and making my own arguments. But I also love like but then I took like an art analysis class of Asian art and I thought, wow, I love this. I like doing analysis and learning about art. And maybe I might have better art skills if I learned how to do it more. And I
Hmm.
love looking at art. I love talking to my friends who are amazing artists. And in my family as well, my grandmother, she was an amazing artist. And so I love that as well. And so I think as a society, we should support all learning styles. We should not treat like someone who doesn't function well in one classroom as like bad behavior. Like kids should not be expected to sit like 8 hours a day. They should have like exercise and free time and recess. And like if someone's like walking around class, someone I don't that should not be seen as bad behavior. I saw like one teacher, some conservative teacher, Daniel Buck on X, he posted, look, this classroom, every kid has like a bounce, like a exercise ball that they sit on, and they're bouncing and all these fidget toys. Like this is not good for learning. Like, yes, it is. And like, dude, you're a Republican, you're conservative, you're supposedly against like the 80 mass prescription of like focus pills at school. I think that like if this will prevent one kid from like going down the prescription cascade that Daniel Gansky and Cold Plunge Camp Cameron Barr did, it will be worth it. And I would love to like work on an exercise ball. I love bouncing exercise balls while I read. I like standing while I read and study. I like walking while I study, actually. Sometimes I like to walk and read like on the treadmill. And so I think
Hmm.
we've got to like have these like new forms of learning, which would really help out people. And the problem is that like so many of these schools, like Franklin Academy, for example, that's the aspect like the sports school I went to, they said we're here for bright students with unique learning styles, but they dumb down the curriculum. They treat us like children. Then we do worse because of it.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're gonna look back on this time similar to how we look back on like the Industrial Revolution. Like, how back in the day in the Industrial Revolution, the work conditions were just crazy.
Horrible.
And they were making
Okay.
kids do like really dangerous things and people were just getting sick and living in these foul environments.
Horrible.
We look back on that. I think we're gonna look back on this at some point it's gonna like we're gonna look back on this in even worse light. We're just gonna be like, wow, we made kids sit through all of that, and then we made adults do these 9 to 5 jobs, like where, yeah, like I think like really
Yeah.
the most objective way I can see this, or the most truthful way, is just that this is all a bit insane and like there's no sort of yeah, like I don't think anyone benefits from this. It like there's only people who are better at tolerating it than others.
Right, and like just as like we progress in some ways, like our work hours are shorter than they were decades ago, and like it's like I read parts of like but then there's also some things that are the same. I didn't read the whole book. I read parts of The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. Have you read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair?
No.
Maybe we should read it together, but that's for another time. But then there's like talks about it's all about the brutal working conditions of the meat industry, how he gets sent to prison, the whole first. But then the first chapter, but then they also make it not just gloom and depression. The first chapter, first 20 pages are all about like a wedding, which is like based on like Eastern European customs. And then the main character, he's like a Polish man. He then there's this amazing chapter that like very beautifully describes how he falls to drinking, and then it has like these like seductive descriptions of how the drink distracts him from everything. Thought, wow, that's just so much like modern day. But like other times, just as we get progressive in better ways, other things get worse. Like for the biggest example, it's like for working class people were more likely to find housing that decades ago than they are today. Working class people, like the peasants in medieval Europe, I mean, this might be a bad example. I know some historians are going to beat me up for this, but like they were not under fear of being eviction unless they had like a very cruel lord, a very cruel lord. They usually like just did their work and they lived under their lord. But like nowadays, with like under this day, people get evicted for out of any reason. It's very hard to find housing, very hard to find work. And this is not just true for autistic people, it's true for everyone. So another thing is like sometimes to help make conditions better for people who neurodivergent people, they don't have to be neurodivergent only. They should be like for the people like vulnerable people in general, which will also help people on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. All right, now we're at the hour mark. Not to say that we need to end, but I'm just yeah.
Any
Um
last thoughts? I think that was great.
I think that was great as well. Yeah, I was wondering, do you have any last thoughts or no?
I just want to say, thank you for inviting me to your podcast. I think your thoughts, you're one of the most unique channels, most unique thinkers, and I only wish you grow more. We need people like this because the viewpoint diversity around autism spectrum disorder is just it's just not diverse enough. We only have people who are like really hateful, but there are also people who claim to be our protectors, but they have had the same ableist stereotypes as RFK Jr. did, just under a more medical model. And they say, oh, autistic people need to be drugged or they need to be like in worse schools. And I
Hmm.
think like, no, we don't. There could be another way. There's gonna be an alternative way. And
Yeah.
I think that we gotta have like more viewpoint diversity. We gotta advocate for ourselves better. But we don't, and also autistic neurotypical, that's a false dichotomy because like I don't think that nerd people are not necessarily more mentally healthy than autistic people. They don't all need to change for autistic people. We can should be mixed. Like we need to change sometimes. They could change other times. And maybe I shouldn't even be saying we about us because we are not a monolith. We
Hmm.
are definitely not a monolith. Why did I say we? Sorry. People on the autism spectrum disorder are definitely not a monolith. We have like so many different viewpoints when it comes to so many different things because the spectrum is so wide.
Hmm.
And so I think we got to like have like people who are like who happen to be like that's why I say I have an ASD diagnosis. I don't say I'm autistic. I say I have an ASD diagnosis because because like that's the label that was placed on me and I cannot get out of my record and I'm not even going to try to get out of my record. But it's not something that I want to define myself. It's not I don't think it's something you want to define yourself by because that's why you want to transcend it.
Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Transcending autism. That's really what it is. And
Transcending.
yeah, I also want to say, to all listening, again, the world's a tough place to live for a lot of people. There's a lot of collective trauma that neurotypicals and neurodivergents alike are healing from. And, there's a reason they call it the work, because there's no more important work to do than that social, emotional, somatic healing process that Eli and I are such advocates for. And, you will inspire a lot of people by going down that path. It's, you know, not everyone does it. It's challenging. You have to challenge some things that you were taught, but ultimately it's very, very rewarding. And yeah, this is all about growth and empowerment. That's really what it all comes down to. Yeah. So I have nothing else to say, Eli. I'm so thankful that you came and, that you just shared your super vast knowledge base. It's really appreciated.
I greatly appreciate coming on here. I think that like and it takes like an hour. It could take like 10 hours. I still wouldn't even get to half or 1/10 of my thoughts because it's such a broad topic and all of us have our amazing brains. We're full of ideas that are processed much more than we can express, much faster than we can even think of. And so that's why, my advice for people is, think about what you find true based off of your life experiences. Think about how you can apply this to yourself moving forward, how you can apply this to your community. I personally try to be less partisan because I don't want like this to be for anyone, whether left or right. I don't want to go into all these different political details. But like, because I think we should, because that's another take. But also, like, my views are like, we should all be accepting of others. We should all be open. We should all we should not be like intolerant of like saying like some people need to be placed elsewhere. We shouldn't like treat like the labels as if they're the word of God, as if they're set in stone. We
Hmm.
should think of them as constructs that are evolving, that can change at any minute, that will probably most definitely, that I am confident 100% will change in like the next few years.
Hmm.
They have
Yeah.
changed a lot in my lifetime, and they will certainly change in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Yeah, so much is on the horizon and, we're looking forward to it. So, Eli, thank you so much. And yeah, to the listener, thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you took some great lessons and perspectives out of it. And we will share a bunch of helpful links that we talked about in this podcast. It'll all be in the bio. And feel free to comment your thoughts. Let's get some discussion going. We love that. So yeah, thank you, Eli, and thank you
Thank
all.
you.